Good morning. How are we doing? It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And as you know and as you get to know me, my favorite part is worship. I could spend the rest of my time just doing that. And I'd love to take off from where this song talks about rather than the message I have. But maybe as a quick introduction, I'm preparing messages for Quebec. I'm going to be there 6 weeks in the month of October and part of November. And the whole theme is about show us the Father. And then going into the Old Testament where Moses says, please show me your glory. And the New Testament has a reference to the Father of glory. And what's interesting sometimes, even as we sing songs about presence, and we can't always measure it, it's not often tangible, you can't grasp it, but we sing words. And we try to understand what do those words mean when it comes to the presence of God. But if you think of Moses when he said, could you please, and there was a debate going on at the time because God's presence wasn't going to go with him. He was going to send an angel with the children of Israel. And so Moses, with the heart that he had, just entreated God and said, could you please go with us? And he says, how shall the children of Israel be distinguished from all other nations of the world? Is it not the fact that your presence is with us? And that's when he says, could you please show me your glory? And again, over the years, I've always wondered, what's glory? It's not tangible. You can't somehow grasp it. But the Lord brought it into such a tangible place, and he begins to define his glory immediately after that request. He says, I will cause all my goodness to pass by before you. I'm going to show you how gracious I am. I'm going to show mercy. And he begins to list 7 ideas of what makes up his nature that brought a tangible part of what the glory of God is. I've been studying this for more than a month, so I'm kind of consumed with it. And if I sing a song about it, it captures me. And I just really, I love coming here. I love the worship. And my greatest desire is always to somehow present that presence of God, that tangible presence of God that makes us unique as Christians. And my topic today is supposed to be, and will be, working empty nesters. And as I was looking for a title for this, I felt that the title, He Makes All Things Beautiful in His Time. And I feel at the season of my life, and I'll interweave a bit of that, at the season of my life, I feel I've got the greater grasp of life than I've ever had. A greater awareness of the surroundings around me, a greater desire for doctrine, but not in an offensive legal manner, absolutely filled with the breath of God's love. That's what makes the difference. But I feel I'm in a season where I'm so alert to my surrounding, and I'm supposed to be retiring. And that's where I'm kind of moving into. So, when you look at this, God makes everything beautiful in His time. And as seasons come and as seasons go and as people are being matured and you're coming into life, I've often wondered, I said, Lord, this is a mystery to me because I feel like I'm just mastering being a father. If I could redo it all over again, the things that I would change because of the lack that I presented as a dad. And I feel in pastoring, I feel like I'm just getting a hold of loving people. And I just have kind of a greater understanding of it. And it just seems like you come to an end now that you've got a grasp of it. And I've concluded that God is preparing us continually for an eternal dwelling, however we want to define that. And so that everything we're going through is to see Christ formed in us, the glory of God, the very nature of God, the very goodness of God being formed in us as the years go by. When Nancy and I were married, the verse we had rings even that were shaped like a threefold cord. And that's what we founded our marriage on, that a threefold cord is not easily broken. And the reality, as you know and understand, that the two cords represent each one of us. But what seems to hold it together and add that strength is Christ. And that verse has sustained us for 43 years of marriage. In the challenges, in the difficulties. Is there any water maybe somebody could get me? So the difficulties and the challenges that every life will go through. And times when you don't feel as close. And then we're reminded that our closeness is hinged to our closeness to Him. If I find this distancing, it's not very hard to realize this is distancing as well. And we've found in our lives that as I maintain my walk with the Lord, as Nancy maintains her walk with the Lord, and as together we walk with God, our strength together in a marriage, as a mom and dad, as grandparents, Nana and Papa, it's all hinged in that. So our lifelong marriage and life must become Christ-centered. Thank you. So looking at a verse, normally I have PowerPoints, but I just didn't feel to go there today. Ecclesiastes 3, chapter 3, verse 1 and 2, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. And anyone my age wants to add turn at the end of it. Isn't that amazing? I wasn't, until I was looking at this, looking back, that you had scriptures in the middle of our times. But so anyhow, there are different seasons, a time to be born and a time to die. And I'm not going to go through all the others. But often, I've done this in funerals. Other pastors may have done the same. They say, you give your birth date and they give the day that you died. And the pastors will say, I'd like to talk about that dash in the middle, where your whole life is lived in that part. And so there is a time for every season. And Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 to 13, He has made everything beautiful in His time, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. And it's interesting when it says, it is a gift of God to look at your labors and to look at all that what you did. And there's a time when you can say, to be able to enjoy that. As I was preparing for this, and it gave me a good time to research and look up statistics and social behaviors and different eras of people's lives, even where the term empty nest syndrome, they even called it, as if it can be something bad. But I want to say in the middle of all of our seasons of life, it can still be so rich. So Nancy and I, we don't have anyone living there, though last night Nanette stayed with the two kids. We have these moments. Sometimes I wonder if we're empty nesters at all. But I love my kids. I love having them around, and I love my grandkids when they say, Papa, and there's a communication, and you're able to influence in their lives. It is good to enjoy the fruit of our labors. And The one thing, to be able to encourage ourselves to walk out our God-given seasons with God. I don't know you all. I know some of you. But to be able to say at times, especially at this era of time, to take an inventory in your life and to see where the Lord is fitting at that point, or has He distanced, or are you closer to Him today than before? Are you more in love with the Lord today than before? Are you more hungry? Are you hungrier for the Scriptures than you've ever been in your life? And then I realized that life can come with unexpected circumstances. I want to use the term unexpected seasons. This wasn't part of our plan. Nancy and I, when we were, first married, and you just have this amazing life ahead of you. You're so excited about God. There's a call on your life for ministry, in my case. And we're planning and making all of this. We're having children, and we're pastoring, and we're moving on. And I was thinking at one point, about 25 years after our marriage, we were meeting with friends that we had all begun together in Christ and families. And many of us began to say, none of us could have pictured 25 years down the road. You can plan the best you can. And then circumstances can happen, and you wonder what happened. There's times you might even say, God, where are you? We have close friends that have ended up in very painful divorces. We have others that ended up in financial ruin and bankruptcies. Strong Christians. Others where death came in unexpectedly, of spouses, of children. This wasn't part of our equation. We just wanted to serve God and watch generations grow. How do you plan for things like that when you get broadsided and you're trying to recover and move on? Those are the realities. I look at some families and I'm so envious because I see the successes of grandparents and 4 and 5 generations of families serving God. And you watch the grace of God on their children and grandchildren, and you see this succession of God's blessing. But not all are in that situation. I was a first-generation Christian, Nancy as well. And so you're pioneering a brand new direction with God's kingdom and God's love and eternity. And you're working out, for me, I was working out of my life, past behaviors that I got saved under. And wanting my kids to have a better walk with God than I did. Watching my grandchildren right now that I'm guiding as much as I can, and at every opportunity that I can, pray for them. So that transference of generation can impact them. And that they don't have to go through some of the challenges that I've gone through. We have very good friends. Some of you may know them, I'm not sure. Paul and Carol Taylor. Anyone know them here? Yeah. So 2 years ago, Paul retires from the fire department, moved to Kelowna. They've got this beautiful life, and we visit them when we go because my mother lives there and I have a daughter. And then Paul's heart was starting to give him difficulty. And then 2 months ago, Carol is diagnosed. I don't think they'd mind me saying this, by the way. And Carol was diagnosed with esophagus cancer and then had a CAT scan and an MRI, and her body is full of cancer. And then I talked with her on Friday, and they've given her 2 months to live. These are just not, they're people we dearly love. But this isn't part of your plan. My mom, she's 93 right now and still quite alert, has a few pains, and has a boyfriend who's 91. And he kind of lives around the corner, and some of the same. She still lives in her own place, still drives. And they gave her a 5-year license. Kelowna is filled with 5-year licenses. And so her boyfriend, Stu, plays golf 3 times a week. You look at situations that are just so different one from another. And what it does for me is that importance. What I was going to say in that, my dad died when he was 63. That was like 30 years ago. And so here she's been without a husband, one she loved, our father. And they had a year and a half after retirement. They had all these plans, bought their trailer, had all these trips planned, and then that was it. The things that we don't count on and expect, it's expected in the days we live in that there's when your nest becomes empty, that there's still a third of your life in front of you. And how do you plan for things like that? One person had said that our empty nest afforded me increased time for prayer. And as I spent more time with God, He transformed my attitude, changing the way that I responded to this new season of life. And so, for Nancy and I, our house, the first thing in the morning, you'll hear this, is worship. I've got my corner, my fireplace, my coffee. I was listening to one man this week, a good teacher that I've known or heard for many, many years. He says, God and I, we have an arrangement. We don't talk to each other until I have my cup of coffee. So I have a place, and that's the first thing we do. All the way till 10 o'clock in the morning, we've got worship. I'm reading. We're praying together. And it's become a wonderful habit, and by no means is our nest empty. Do you follow what I mean? It doesn't have to be a syndrome. There's pain of transition. And especially as we live in the north, you've got kids that live quite a ways. Some of us, have kids that are far away. We don't get to see the grandchildren and them as often as we'd like to. In Hebrews 12, verse 2, it says, looking unto Jesus, the author, and we can focus there, but it says also the finisher of our faith. So that there's still this ongoing. In Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, what He has begun, He will complete until the return of Jesus Christ. So it's a wonderful walk of life and the privilege of being able to walk with God. The kingdom of God must be our pursuit from birth to our very last breath and becomes expressed in our everyday life in every season. This afternoon I've got to go to a funeral in Champaign. Ray Jackson, who has been a very good friend, wonderful man, really had no idea of the magnitude of what this man carried and as he represented the Yukon and the First Nation people. And so last Monday night he died. And when I was visiting him in the hospital, you just had that sense that he had finished his course. There's others I go pray for and I don't feel it's their time. And I find myself, and that's the dilemma of a pastor. Do you pray for healing or do you pray for, a smooth exit? That didn't sound so good, did it? You have this dilemma, but the main thing is that their hearts are ready. And then I had such a good friend. I'm kind of coming today in a different mode, but a good friend that pastors in Big Bear, California, Friday was cleaning a trail along with a group and then just dropped. 68 years old. They managed to there was a nurse there and did CPR, brought him back, and he's under heavy support right now until they look into things tomorrow. My heart crushed. I don't know if it's the age. My mom says this often at 93. She says, she still visits people in the hospital, still visits people in different homes, and then says so often, my friend so-and-so died this week, And her friendship base is lessening every time. A thought I'd like to present right now, kind of closing, is I've always had this for years, but in Genesis 48, it talks about the interaction of 3 generations. And the way it's developed, it has so impacted me and continues to impact me today. We've often thought that as the people age, then you pass the baton to the next, and the aged are finished running. And I don't see that anywhere in the Scriptures. That's why I say in my life, I don't want to retire. I absolutely love what I'm doing. I love the continued formation of Christ in my life. I love the fact that I'm getting to know Him more and more and more. And how can I, in a definition of certain retirements, park Him? And go change into this season of enjoying something and tell myself, I've deserved this. I can't tell you how many people say, I hear you're retired now, or when are you going to retire? And the word retire is all there. And in my heart, I can't. How do I stop allowing Christ in me to have influence in the world that I'm in? The day that I stop breathing will be the day that I will no longer have influence on this earth. But as long as I have breath and I come around a world around me that is void of Him, there's something in me that wants to engage. So I've been able to transition, at our church, so I'm there. I don't know, they don't know what to call me. I said assistant pastor didn't seem to fit. Well, director, just put director of something, in there. And Simon and Zoe are doing such a beautiful job. And I've been able to be part of churches all my growing up where the previous pastor has been able to stay. It's a family. And you fathered. How do you put them out to pasture? Pastors in pastures. How do you do that? And we've had the absolute blessing of being able to be part and watch a new pastor move on, and I'm there in absolute full support. And I tell him, I say, Simon, if I ever get in the way, if I ever overstep my boundaries, if ever that leadership in me wants to kind of take over, I said, put me in my place. So anyhow, I can't retire. And I'm having, it just naturally unfolded. Quebec opened up, and when I go, the churches continue to increase. I've got 8 churches when I go. A month and a half isn't enough time. And they always ask me, c'est quand tu vas déménager là? When are you going to move here? It's just not part of that. But I'm busy, excitedly busy, and continue to seek God for the influences and responsibilities I have. So back in Genesis chapter 48, in verse 8, and I'm not going to read this whole part, but the story has to do with Joseph bringing his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, actually Manasseh and Ephraim from oldest to youngest, to Jacob. And the tradition of that day and all the way through the Scriptures, I believe it's still in the New Testament, is the pronouncing of a blessing from the father, from the papa, and being able to transfer a blessing. And I wonder today if all papas would raise your hands. Why don't you do that right now? Two hands up. All papas, grandpapas. You're afraid, aren't you? I'm going to turn you into Pentecostals. And mothers, could you do the same? All nanas and mamas. We don't realize the authority that has been carried from Old Testament into New Testament in being able to lay hands on your children and pray for them, to lay hands on your grandchildren and pray for them. So watch what happens here. So Joseph brings his 2 sons, and it indicates they were around his knees. So that shows you how the size. I've got 2 right now, Shiloh and Costello. She didn't want to name him Abbott. But I have a Costello and a Shiloh knee size. And I can't tell you my heart's desire as a papa. So Joseph brings his 2 children, and the custom was you put the oldest, Manasseh, at the right hand of Joseph facing. So he took Manasseh in his left hand, brought him to Jacob's right hand. And he took Ephraim and brought him to Jacob's left hand to pronounce the right hand of blessing that is transferred from generation to generation. So what happens then in the middle of this, looking at verse 15, then Jacob, or Israel, blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked in faithful obedience, the God who has been my shepherd, leading and caring for me all my life to this day, the angel, in capital A there, often referred to the Lord himself, who has redeemed me continually from all evil, bless the boys. This is the Amplified, by the way. And may my name live on in them. May they be worthy of having their names linked with mine, and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a great multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon Ephraim, see, he crossed his hands. And there's a purpose of what I'm going to be bringing out here. It displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head onto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put your right hand upon his head. You know, when I began reading this, if you can kind of work with me a bit on this, it's like one generation saying to the next generation, you don't know what you're doing anymore, it's our turn. You with me? That's how strong I began reading this. And when you look at it, there's 3 generations being interacted here. So then in verse 19, and his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. And what he's saying here is, I know what I'm doing. We've got to understand that last song we were singing about his presence. I really would love to, like I said, I could camp there. God's presence is tangible. We can experience a very living Christ. We can experience God moving with us, not just the doctrines. It's good to have the doctrines and to have a solid foundation on the Scriptures, but what I came to learn was a presence. That's what captured my heart. I never knew I could know him. And here you have situations with Joseph and Jacob. Jacob had that understanding of God's presence. He had the understanding of the authority of the laying on of hands and what it would do. So here he says, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Jacob was a man with a prophetic insight. He was a man who walked with God. And that's what I really want to transfer is it possible as we grow and mature and walk with God long enough that we capture an idea of God's nature. We capture an idea of God's makeup. We can capture an idea of being able to look at generations with insight. We can see things in our kids. How many moms and dads begin to see already at the early ages characteristics? And you begin to pray into that because you see a godly destiny that's already there from the beginning. I believe that's wisdom that we can grow in, but not void of God's presence. It's God's presence that gives you the ability to see things a little bit far off than what the natural would see. So here he has his hands and he crosses them, and you find this dynamic going on between 3 generations. And I want to say that for me, I'm not ready for the pasture. You know, there's too much in me that wants to be transferred and shared. And how much more my own family? How much more to invest in my marriage and relationship at this stage and season of my life? How much more to invest in the care of health? I keep saying to God, because my heart is so full and I feel calls in different places, I said, give me a body to match my calling. You know, I'm tired at times. And the 3 hours change when I go to Quebec, that's not good. We don't do good together, that kind of change. But I'm saying, give me strength, give me health. And so I have a responsibility to care for my health because of what's in front of me. Can you see here this dynamic? I want to transfer today to empty nester parents. I want to transfer to fathers and mothers and grandparents and, grandmothers and grandfathers, nanas and papas, whatever the title is. I want to transfer in you that godly responsibility to lay hands on your children and pray for them often. You know, my grandson Turner came up with my daughter Joanna's son. He's 11, but it was the first time they spent 2 weeks with us, and I took him to my favorite spot where we go look at eagles. And we just walked together. We held hands. He took my binoculars, and he took my camera. He was engaged, and I saw a grandson that my spirit was knitting with. There was such a love and a bonding that I don't think I'd had prior to that. Costello and Shiloh. Shiloh's a hugger. He just puts his arms around me in 9 months and just hugs. And right from my heart comes godly prayer and transfer. I remember when Costello was born, this is how I was sitting in my quiet prayer place, and Costello came by. And he was just learning how to walk. But it was like he was playing with his toys and looked up for a moment and whispered. And he said, Papa. And it was the first time there was a connection made. And then I had him, and he was sleeping on my lap. I began to proclaim over him destiny. If you'd have heard me, it started off simple. Lord, bless Costello, make him strong. And then all of a sudden I went into this more, my name is Costello. I serve God, and I'm going to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. My name is Costello. I was going through this whole little thing, just me and him. Nobody knew. You see what we can transfer one to another. And so I'm not saying become Pentecostal. But you have authority out of your spirit through your hands. The New Testament is filled about hands. And so I want to encourage, to some, it's not an easy season. To some, because of the economy and the days we live in, working empty nesters is probably more real today than ever. And people trying to make things, become well for them. Others planned and were able to plan maybe better, and things might be a little bit easier for you. But I feel in this season of our times, how do I continue to make my life rich for Christ? I want to say, look at short-term missions. Look at mentoring. Look at investing into church. Take your time and make it so rich. And if I can say, you don't have to retire. I wonder if you'd stand with me. This wasn't totally everything, but I hope you heard my heart in the middle of that. And I think we're just going to sing a couple of songs right now, and afterwards, I'd like to just pray over you.